Well, we now have the answer as to why we just blew up 11 people in the Caribbean who Donald Trump claims were part of the Aragua Venezuelan drug cartel controlled by the Maduro dictatorship in Venezuela. It's because, haven't you heard, we're at war with Venezuela. We just blew up one of their ships. It's not the only time in the American history we've ever had a blow up of a ship used as a pretext to start a war. This one wasn't in the Gulf of Tonkin, however, but it was used as a justification for a new bad order against Donald Trump. Came out the same day by the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals about his use of the Alien Enemies Act to deport people starting in March. Supreme Court told the Fifth Circuit back in May, go figure out whether Donald Trump properly exercised his rights under the Alien Enemies Act. Are we at war with Venezuela? That's news to us, but right on schedule, right on target, I almost said. Donald Trump blew up a boat on the day that the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals said that he improperly and illegally used the powers under the Alien Enemies Act, because we're not at war. There is no predatory incursion. He therefore can't remove people pursuant to that provision from 1798. I put the two stories together the only way I know how, without blowing smoke or sunshine, here on Legal AF. All right, let's get to it. Same day, not a coincidence. As I've said before, Donald Trump has a nasty little habit that when bad things happen to him in court generally, about the Epstein case, about his use of presidential power, about the Alien Enemies Act, something else is going to happen. Another wag the dog moment's going to happen. Some war is going to get started. Some attack's going to happen. Some occupation of a blue city or state's going to happen with federal armed forces and federal troops. That's the nasty little secret of the Trump administration, to distract from the losing in the courts. And he's lost in the courts 2-1. And this was an interesting 2-1 because you had Southwick, who was a Bush appointee, and you had a Biden appointee, Bush and Biden appointee, Carrillo Ramirez, two judges in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals sitting in New Orleans, dealing with a Texas case. Those courts usually lean to the right. But this Bush appointee and Biden appointee got together 2-1. They outvoted the Trumper, Andrew Oldham. Hold that thought. I'll tell you more about Andrew Oldham. And they ruled 2-1 that Donald Trump did not have the power to, and he improperly declared a war where one does not exist. Congress has not declared a war. Trump cannot declare a war. We are not at war with Venezuela, and he can't say that we are, just so he can start abusing people's constitutional and due process rights. That's the 2-1 decision. Goes on for about 50 pages. I'm going to post it on Legal AF, the Substack, so you can read it in full. In fact, the main decision written by Leslie Southwick, he wrote that decision, but the dissent by Andrew Oldham, who's trying out to be on the United States Supreme Court, he's MAGA to the core. His dissent is 88 pages. Nothing says we've got to get this resolved in the United States Supreme Court like 133 pages. Now, even in the main decision that went against Donald Trump, the 2-1 decision was effectively almost apologetic for having to make this ruling. They said, well, it's really for the United States Supreme Court to make the ruling, but we have to make some ruling because they sent it back to us, so we're going to rule that Trump improperly invoked the Alien Enemies Act. Now let's take the second part of this story. Why did we bomb the boat in the Caribbean? We'll show a roll here of the actual bombing going on. Now, every time somebody in the administration was asked about this, mainly Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, watch his reactions to this. And you tell me whether you think we're at war or we're trying to do interdiction of drugs and stop a drug trade. He never mentions war. He never mentions enemy combatant. He never mentions predatory incursion. In fact, let me roll two clips. First one is him hot off the presses justifying Donald Trump being a tough guy and taking out 11 people in the Caribbean. Let's roll that clip.
Yeah, the president made the announcement and said it was a lethal strike. Suffice it to say that the president is going to be on offense against drug cartels and drug trafficking in the United States. It destabilizes not just the country, but the entire Caribbean basin. These particular drugs were probably headed to Trinidad or some other country in the Caribbean, at which point they just contribute to the instability these countries are facing. So the president's been very clear that he's going to use the full power of America and the full might of the United States to take on and eradicate these drug cartels, no matter where they're operating from, and no matter how long they've been able to act with impunity, those days are over. This is a counter-drug operation. We're going to take on drug cartels wherever they are and wherever they're operating against the interests of the United States. The president's top obligation is to secure the national interest and the national security of our people. I know of no president that means that more than this one, our president now, President Trump. And so, but I'm not going to speculate about what might come down the road.
Okay. Now, you don't hear anything that would justify the war, although this is the reason that they did it. To be able to say to the courts, look, we're at war. We just blew up a warship. You blew up a boat that had 11 people on it, allegedly with drugs on it, which I guess we'll have to get to the bottom of, no pun intended. But later that same day, Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, is asked by an intrepid reporter, what is his legal justification for bombing this boat? We just took out 11 people in the Caribbean. May or may not be part of Tren de Aragua. I don't remember a trial. There certainly wasn't any due process. There wasn't even a warning before they blew him out of the water. Lots of international law issues here, don't you think so? But it sort of caught Marco Rubio off guard. The authorization, the what? Watch this clip.
Regime. What's the legal authority for this strike?
The legal authority?
Yeah.
Well, look, again, I'm not going to answer for the White House counsel. Suffice it to say that all of those steps were taken in advance. The president has designated these as terrorist organizations, which is what they are.
Okay. So, well, the Office of Legal Counsel, I'll have to tell you about that. The only takeaway you can make from those back-to-back clips is that the Trump administration doesn't care about the law, the rule of law, international rights, the rights of those people. If they're really drug dealers, why don't they, instead of bombing them, why didn't they send a warship at least, pick them up, give them due process, convict them, and send them away to jail? No, because they had to make a big show because they got the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals ruling against them, which I'm going to read to you from in a minute. So they got to convince the American people we're at war, to which the Fifth Circuit 2-1 said, no, you're not. Let me read to you from the actual opinion written by Leslie Southwick. Here's what he wrote. This litigation began after, this is on page 2, after 2 of the petitioners who were natives of Venezuela were detained by immigration officials on the basis that they were members of a Venezuelan terrorist organization. The petitioners filed for a writ of habeas corpus in federal court, alleging they were about to be removed to El Salvador. Remember that killer torture prison in El Salvador? The proclamation was issued under the authority of a 1798 statute applicable only in the event of a declared war, an invasion, or a predatory incursion by a foreign nation or government, and it allows the president to detain alien enemies. We used it, for instance, in the 1940s, when we were in World War II against the Japanese and the German, to put into internment camps, concentration camps, Japanese and German Americans, because we were scared. Petitioners sought an opportunity to dispute that they were members in the organization, that would be Tren de Aragua, and also to show the proclamation was unlawful. It then says it went to the Supreme Court, where the court granted a temporary injunction to stop them from being removed, didn't make a ruling on the substance of the Alien Enemies Act, sent it back to the Fifth Circuit to do exactly that. They then say, this is the most apologetic court I've ever seen, 2-1. We state now that the case law we just cited and others we will review do not directly or unambiguously give us the answers that the Supreme Court wants us to answer. Thus, judicial humility is particularly appropriate here. A decision must be made, of course, for acceptance or rejection by the Supreme Court. So here's what the order is. Our analysis leads us to grant a preliminary injunction to prevent removal because we find no invasion or predatory incursion. Conclude on the current record that the updated notice that they were given, 7 days notice that they were going to use the Alien Enemies Act, was satisfied due process, and remand back to the trial court level for further proceedings. Now, there was also a sort of a split decision, a ruling within the ruling. It was 2-1 that Donald Trump, which is the main heart of the case, that Donald Trump does not have the power under the Alien Enemies Act to remove or detain people because there's no war, predatory incursion, or anything of the sort. And they don't defer to Trump's declaration that there was. Scary world to live in. All Trump has to do, even though we can plainly see we're not at war with Venezuela, we might have a drug trafficking problem with Venezuela, but we're not at war with a country of Venezuela or anywhere else. It's kind of scary. Just under the dissent's Andrew Oldham in the dissent, under his analysis, all the president has to do is basically say, "Forget your lying eyes. I'm telling you, there's a war going on. Everybody get into the concentration camp." Nobody has due process rights. I'm suspending the Constitution. I'm declaring martial law. There's an insurrection. See, you can't have judges defer 100% to a president's declaration of war when only Congress can declare war, or his views about predatory incursions, or his views about insurrections or rebellions, because you see what will happen in the hands of somebody like Donald Trump. It's an abuse of power. And that's how federal courts rein them in. Now, they then go through all the analysis at the end, and they go through what the definition of invasion is and war and predatory incursion and all of that. At the end, Andrew Oldham, who's in dissent, does 88 pages of dissent. And in his dissent, he effectively says that there's 230 plus years of precedent where we always defer to the president whenever they declare something related to foreign policy or national security. That's a scary world to live in, Judge Oldham. It's not one I want to reside in, where we just trust the president. We have an out-of-control rogue president who believes he's immune from any prosecutions and therefore can get away with anything, including murder. And we have him now using all sorts of statutes, dusting them off. They're all like cobwebbed from having never been used in 200 years or 150 years, and using them and going, there's a war going on, and the Constitution is suspended temporarily during the election time, during midterm elections. Let's seize the ballot boxes. We're not that far off. Judge yesterday, Judge Breyer, this is back-to-back terrible rulings for Donald Trump. Judge Breyer just found that Donald Trump is in the process of creating illegally, unconstitutionally, a federal police force to use on domestic soil in violation of the Posse Comitatus Act with him, the police force, with him as the chief. And then went through some scenarios. A couple of them hit a little too close to home for me, that Donald Trump could try to use in order to send the National Guard to your front door. Could a president, he pondered, could a president, on false reports of voter fraud, use the National Guard to interfere with elections, seize voting machines, seize ballots, stop a vote count, stop mail-in balloting, stop absentee balloting, through the use of the National Guard? So forgive me if we don't trust this president, Judge Oldham. Now, where's this case going next? Now that it's been ruled upon against Donald Trump, and there was I started to say there was a ruling within a ruling. There was a 2-1 decision going the other way, which was joined by Judge Southwick and Judge Oldham, that found the notice that was given to these people that the Alien Enemies Act and about their removal was sufficient at 7 days. Judge Carrillo Ramirez thought you got to give him at least 21 days. So there was a little bit of a fight over that. But that's a little tempest in a teapot. The main decision here that's going up to the Supreme Court is about Donald Trump's use of the Alien Enemies Act, and fundamentally whether we just defer 100%, bend over backwards to whenever a president says we're at war or enemy incursion or invasion. And now we see, right, the wag the dog fake moment of bombing these 11 people out of existence in order to justify the war, the predatory incursion. By the way, they were in the Caribbean. They weren't on the shores of America. So there goes that theory. I'm going to continue to follow it all right here. While you're here, hit the free subscribe button. Slide all over to Legal AF Substack. We're building an amazing, beautiful community there. I do 1 or 2 live reports every day at the minute. In real time, I bring 2,000 or 3,000 people together, all on Legal AF Substack. And consider being a paid member. It's really cheap, but we give you lots of content in return for that. So until my next report, I'm Michael Popok. I'm Michael Popok, and I got some big news for our audience. Most of you know me as the co-founder of Midas Touches Legal AF and the Legal AF YouTube channel, or as a 35-year national trial lawyer. Now, building what we started together on Legal AF, I've launched a new law firm, the Popok Firm, dedicated to obtaining justice through compassionate and zealous legal representation. At the Popok firm, we are focused on obtaining justice for those who have been injured or damaged by a life-altering event, by securing the highest dollar recoveries. I've been tirelessly fighting for justice for the last 35 years, so my own law firm organically building on my legal AF work just feels right. And I've handpicked a team of top-tier trial fighters and settlement experts throughout all 50 states known as big auto injury attorneys who have the know-how to beat heartless insurance companies, corporations, government entities, and their attorneys. Big Auto's attorneys working with my firm are rock stars in their respective states and collectively responsible for billions of dollars in recoveries. So if you or a loved one have been on the wrong side of a catastrophic auto, motor vehicle, rideshare, or truck accident, suffered a personal injury, or been the victim of medical malpractice, employment harassment or discrimination, or suffered a violation of your civil and constitutional rights, then contact the Popok firm today at 1-877-POPOK-AF or by visiting my website at www.thepopokfirm.com and fill out a free case evaluation form. And if we determine that you have a case and you sign with us, we don't get paid unless you do. The Popok firm, fighting for your justice every step of the way.